hi Eddie, I'm here talking like in this very weird voice because I'm finding it hard not to try and laugh doing this.
Hello and welcome to Spoiler Alert. I'm your host Ned, and joining me as ever is my co-host Kyle.
Hello everybody.
And our guest returning, Will.
Hi.
And we are back to talk about more Spider-Man. Yeah.
Do we have to talk about what we have to start with?
Let's start off with the worst.
Basically what happened was last time we've been recording for a bit too long, in my eyes anyway, so we decided to split the load into this one, which is probably going to be a bit shorter anyway because we've got a bit less to discuss.
We might as well set the scene. The last episode we talked about the entire Sam Raimi trilogy and The Amazing Spider-Man, but we didn't have enough time to talk about that, which we're probably going to have no choice but to talk about now, aren't we?
I mean, yeah, but we've got a few quite random films to talk about here. Quite a mixed bag.
Definitely.
Some better than others, I think it's fair to say.
It has my favourite and my least favourite in here, which is actually saying a lot.
Mm-hmm. There's some genuinely good films in here, and some not so good films, to say the least.
Let's just get this one over with.
Yeah, I think we should just get started. We've prolonged it long enough.
Okay, Dr. Connor's in prison talking to this shadowed guy in a hat, talking about some plans or what. I didn't give a shit, basically, but what this was basically leading us to believe was that Sony was developing this magical thing called a universe with Sony Spider-Man characters, featuring primarily the Sinister Six. And the
didn't go anywhere.
German scientists that held Electro captive to the point where it feels I have no clue what they were actually his deathbed when he's probably just minutes away from passing away. He's like, oh yeah, by the way, our disease is genetic, you're gonna die too. Okay, bye. You kind of get what I mean. It's a really dickheadish thing to say to your son just when you're on your deathbed.
Yeah.
Just saying, yeah, don't worry, kid, you're gonna die the exact same way I will.
Oh, and should we get on to the massive twist about Peter's parents and what their role to play in this film
still not...
Homecoming. And I want to quickly just mention as well Civil War, just because he's partially in that too.
There's a lot of very interesting history with this one. So after The Amazing Spider-Man 2 happened, I think it turned a small profit, but because of the absolute critical thrashing, along with the fact that it met below Sony's own expectations, I think it was fair to say that they wanted to revamp Spider-Man again. Yeah. But this time, I think we can agree it was arguably for the better, because that's when they struck a deal with Disney where they granted them permission to use the Spider-Man characters and integrate them into the Marvel Cinematic Universe under the condition that if there was any solo Spider-Man movies in the MCU, that Sony would be allowed to market and distribute the movies, which I think everybody was happy at that announcement.
With Andrew and being okay Spider-Man but bad Peter Parker, and same with Toby, opposite. Tom is best, he's good with both. He's a good Spider-Man and he's a good
Tom
Peter.
Holland is absolutely fantastic in the part. He looks like Peter Parker, he acts like Peter Parker, he acts like Spider-Man as well. He's just perfect as everything.
He inherits one thing that I think most Peter Parker iterations fail to achieve, and that's the fact that he's a kid first and foremost. Yeah, he's a very smart whiz kid, but at the same time he is still 15. He's in high school. He has crushes. He still has a lot of his own immature moments. And yeah, in Homecoming, there is a lot of things that he does learn about his core responsibility when he inherits the suit from Tony Stark. It's about him learning about the hardships of growing up with this unprecedented power that he's just sort of inherited, essentially. I like how the film lets him act mostly just like a kid, because that means that there's a lot more for him to learn, but at the same time it inherits that core of what Spider-Man's supposed to be, if you get what I mean.
It really feels like a natural high school kid, and the high school feels alive.
He does feel like the most grounded Spider-Man. I especially like as well, small little details, okay, so in the first two films, the fact that these two supposedly high school characters can make this really intricate suit that any cosplayer would probably take years to perfect.
He just inherits a suit that's cybernetically enhanced.
But no, before that, Tom Holland's original suit was literally just a hoodie with the Spider-Man logo on. It was actually very reminiscent of the human spider from the first Spider-Man movie. It was actually just basically a hoodie with the Spider-Man logo on, some ski mask, balaclava.
It's a lot more realistic because, being a scientific whiz kid, I can buy him creating gadgets and like web fluid and shit,
Yeah.
but I can't buy him like making a full-on fashion designed suit. But yeah, I liked how they introduced Peter Parker into the MCU with Civil War, because even though it was kind of clear that he was kind of a last-minute addition, because they obviously just struck that deal with Sony around the time that Civil War was likely in production.
It was a very good entry.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It at least set the boundaries for what his story in Homecoming was going to be, because that film actually opens with basically him recording some videos when Happy was taking him over to Berlin to basically help out Stark to fight Captain America at that airport, which was actually very excellently done, because it sets up his character perfectly. It kind of shows a lot of his immature and goofy side. It shows how he inherited that suit, and it also kind of shows his wanting to help others, because without being with the Avengers, all he can really do is just help people out in New York while he's doing his daily commutes to high school.
What I loved about Homecoming was that it wasn't just the exact same film as Amazing Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 1, because it was literally just a different kind of film. He'd already got his powers.
He already lost
really
Uncle
refreshing,
Ben.
Not seeing another origin story, as we all know how Spider-Man.
That's not the point. It's a whole Marvel universe, essentially, so we already know what his motivations are right from the very beginning. It's just when actual evil comes to home in New York where he has to take a stand for himself, not specifically with the Avengers themselves. And you know what, I'll just talk about Michael Keaton briefly, because I actually think he's quite an underappreciated Marvel villain.
He's very good.
I think we can agree that most MCU bad guys are usually the weakest aspect of the entire universe, generally.
It's quite obvious when they're definitely not going to be returning.
Yeah, but Michael Keaton actually has some good motives, because he's meant to be like, a freelance construction worker. It's just that following the Avengers fight of the first Avengers movie, he obviously got out of a job because the government wanted to clear up any evidence that the Avengers were ever there, which meant that they were experimenting and toying with a lot of the alien tech that was basically left behind for scraps, which was how they were able to build all of this really cool technology.
You can see his motives, you can almost agree with him. It's a good villain.
Yeah, exactly. He's just an everyman that wants to support for his family and his daughter, who's obviously the girl that Peter Parker's crushing over. So it actually makes sense in terms of, wanting to support his family, but it also makes for a lot more funny and emotional stakes when Peter Parker actually finds out, holy shit, the girl I'm dating is actually the guy I'm supposed to be fighting.
The style of Homecoming is so good, just enough humor and just enough serious parts is brilliant.
It's a bit weird though, because the film can have its very serious and funny moments, but I think it's because the film goes for a very 80s John Hughes feel. I think if you've seen a John Hughes film like The Breakfast Club or Ferris Bueller's Day Off or something like that, you can see a lot of that influence and tone in Homecoming, with its high school setting and a lot of the characterizations of a lot of Peter Parker's friends in his community. It's just what I think it was one of the director's core inspirations for Homecoming, but I think that actually helps in making the character a lot more relatable. It helps to make the character fit in with this more modern age that we're living in, especially in a very, much more saturated setting of superhero films. It's not one of my personal favorite Spider-Man movies, mostly because I think if you're not up to date with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you could easily get lost in it, especially since it has characters like Happy and especially Tony Stark in it. But for what it is, it's a damn solid Spider-Man movie, and you know what? It's a great MCU movie, actually.
Sometimes, Spidey can feel like Iron Man Jr., Iron Man coming in at the end of the day just to save everything, but
And the fact that he has his glasses in the new film, Far From Home. He inherits Stark's glasses, which kind of...
He lives on, Tony Stark's legacy a little bit after Tony sacrifices himself at the end of Endgame.
Of the MCU.
Anyway, I don't really want to go too in depth on this one, because it's one we want to go more in detail on.
But can we talk about that car scene? It's a brilliant scene about him finding out that he's actually Spider-Man. It shows that villains aren't actually stupid. They can figure it out on their own.
Oh yeah, that is very good. Yeah, Michael Keaton was genuinely creepy as well.
I how the traffic light goes red on his face as soon as he finds out, and it's just
it goes green. Yeah, that's a really cool little
that
detail.
Car scene's one of the best scenes in any superhero movie ever, to be honest.
The cast in general, I actually think is great. Actually, I don't remember a lot of the names of the actors, but I remember the guy who played Flash Thompson. He's a very fun new take on the character. I like how they made him a bully, yes, but he's actually a bit of a loser as well. I think Zendaya is fine as MJ. I think they're meant to be giving her a lot more of a development as a character for Far From Home, but we'll talk about that one later.
Like it, yeah.
But Yeah, solid movie. It's not one of my favorites. It's not something I like to revisit that often, but you got to give credit where credit's due. It's a solid Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably my favorite bar one, which we haven't talked about yet. Certainly not this
Oh
one.
God.
Venom, bum, 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 bum. Venom, Venom. Where's the hero?
Here's the thing, right? When I first saw Venom in the cinema, I did think it was pretty goddamn bad. However, while watching it for this, it's even worse. Oh my god, this film is not good. This is not good at all.
Oh my god, why don't we actually even start with this movie? Okay, I feel like we're kind of cheating with this one a little bit because this technically isn't a Spider-Man movie because it doesn't have Spider-Man in it, but it does heavily feature Spider-Man characters and properties, so we feel like it's warranted to talk about
weird,
here.
like not having Spider-Man in like Venom movie.
It's meant to be like a start of this new universe that Sony's trying to build, featuring this multiverse of characters, you know, featuring a lot of these properties. I think they're meant to be linking it to Spider-Verse and even Far From Home to an extent because of how they're introducing Mysterio and stuff like that. But as far as I'm concerned, it's more canon to Sony's take on the universe rather than what Disney's doing.
When we're talking about like having the crossover with Spider-Man, like likely, it's gonna be like,
oh my god,
so bad.
The sad thing is that
please don't make this canon.
The sad thing is that it's likely going to happen.
Thing is, I know a lot of people actually like this film. I do not know what the hell they see.
I think it's because I think they find a lot of it kind of funny. And I will admit, from an ironic level, I think the film can be actually kind of entertaining because, just to put it short, it's essentially about Eddie Brock, a reporter who basically loses his girlfriend and his job after he basically tries to get too much information out of this guy who's basically experimenting with alien symbiotes that have just crash landed onto Earth. Fine, I guess that's a decent motivation and character so far, I think.
That's not strictly true. What it was that basically he was talking to this like Elon Musk type character.
Does the villain own Tesla or anything?
Basically talking about his other businesses that apparently have had some shady passes, to say the least. The problem is he was not there to talk about that. He was literally paid. Like, I remember, he's a very noteworthy journalist.
Yeah, a very respected one.
And yet he decides to go completely off the cuff and just talk about just this unrelated stuff that has nothing to do with anything. And he has no real sources for it. He has no real reason to do it. He just I've got a hunch. I feel like I'm right. And
he loses everything as a result. He loses his goddamn girlfriend and his job and his home.
And we're meant to feel sorry for this guy just because, oh, look, he's right. No, that doesn't make it right, though, because...
He doesn't know anything about the symbiotes or anything up at that point, does he?
He doesn't know about that. He has no sources. He has no reason to sort of do the things that he did. Just because he's right doesn't make what he did okay.
And not only that, not only does the film seem like it's trying too hard to play like a serious tone at points, but even when it's trying to attempt to be a comedy, and I say that in like major quotes, even that sort of falls flat on its face because a lot of the time, I realise in a lot of scenes where I'm not actually quite sure as a viewer whether or not I'm supposed to find something disturbing or funny per se. And I think the scene that best describes that for me is that scene where, you know, Tom Hardy's in a restaurant, and I think it was around the time in the movie where the symbiote attached himself to his body and he just didn't realise that yet. But he basically starts acting like a crazy son of a bitch and then basically starts bathing in like this lobster tank. And I'm wondering, okay, I'm guessing it's trying to be funny because it's kind of out of nowhere and it's a bit awkward given the situation that they're in, but at the same time it's also kind of weirdly disturbing because it's not every day that you see somebody sweating buckets, looking like they're having huge hunger cramps and just bathing in a lobster tank. It's a bit weird.
Speaking of Tom Hardy, I'd say there are probably two pieces of credit I've probably got to give this film. One is that even though the characters are all written like garbage, Tom Hardy is fantastic.
Oh yeah, he's a fantastic actor. He can do no wrong, really. That's the thing. I think the material he's given is utter shit, but at least he does try his best with what he's given.
The other thing is, they do that whole trope, oh, I'm the ex, and my ex has gotten with some other guy. However, they didn't go through the whole absolute cliche of, oh, but both my ex and her new partner hate me because I am her ex kind of thing. They could have easily done that and they didn't, and I'm very glad they did. So props to you guys for doing that. The effects are pretty good too, I'll say that as well.
I think the effects can get a bit too overbearing and overly done, especially near the end, but for the most part it looks very solid. I actually like how Venom looks legitimately very slimy. His textures look just right. In fact, Venom in the film actually looks great, I will definitely say that. Just not a huge fan with the way that they actually portrayed Venom, because
I hate how it's like a buddy comedy with Venom. It's just it's so weird.
Yeah, you're basically right. He's just like his inner conscience a lot of the time, which is like, "Hi Eddie, I'm here talking like in this very weird voice because I'm actually I'm finding it hard not to try and laugh doing this."
That stuff really kills the mood in some scenes for me, because there are some scenes that I would undoubtedly find pretty funny if that voice hadn't just ruined it. And I'd just be like, that's actually a pretty decent joke, but you've ruined it with that stupidly edgy voice.
That's actually Tom Hardy doing the voice.
Well, it's still stupid. It doesn't matter who's doing it. It's still stupid.
I'm also not a fan with how they like made Venom an anti-hero per se, because say what you want about Venom and the way that you want the character to be represented, but the one thing that he will never be is a good guy. He is a symbiote. He's an alien species that is made specifically to kill. The whole point of Venom, even when he's attached to Eddie Brock, is that he needs to feed on the living human beings in order to survive within like the atmosphere of planet Earth. The character was designed from the get-go to basically be this alien species meant to eat people, basically a straight-up bad guy. I cannot buy that Venom has like a change of heart towards the end of the movie, because back on my home planet I'm kind of a loser.
God, they dialogue in this film.
I can't buy it. I can't see him as a good guy. Do you kind of get what I mean here? I just simply can't buy it.
And then there's that whole stuff about how they basically set up fire is one of Venom's big weaknesses. And then it gets to the point where, oh yeah, Venom's going to sacrifice himself. And then for no reason whatsoever, he just comes back. It's never ever explained.
And then it leads to like this very unfunny and unnecessary ending scene where he basically just eats like this guy who's trying to rob this little convenience store, which was
like a turd in the wind.
And it pulls an amazing Spider-Man 2 where the last bit of the movie is literally the last bit you see in the trailer as well. What the hell is going on here, Sony? What is it with Sony and spoiling the last parts of their movies?
Genuinely, it's awful. But like literally, so the thing about the fire bit, the reason why I'm okay with these sort of tropes, why the character's going to die, Psyche is not actually dead, is because normally it's kind of explained or it's kind of believable. But in this film, it's physically set up that Venom will die if he encounters fire. And then in the last act of the film, he encounters fire. And guess what? It's not explained how he survived it, but he just survived it. And it just doesn't make any sense.
Screw this movie.
The best part of this movie was just the Spider-Verse trailer at the end.
Yeah, it did. They actually did put a teaser.
Absolutely.
Plus, can we also give credit to probably the worst bit of licensed song that Eminem has ever done?
Venom.
I'm done talking about this movie. I'll put it this way. I prefer it over The Amazing Spider-Man 2 because at least with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I just find most of it just generally boring and unenjoyable. At least in an ironic sense, I can enjoy Venom for humor's sake. It does not make it good at all because ironic humor should not count as legitimately good comedy. But at least I can say with Venom, there's at least some entertainment value and I can understand to some extent why people enjoy it. But even that's kind of scraping it thin when it's so clearly still a manufactured Sony project, when they're trying to build a universe because they're trying to piggyback of what Marvel's doing and they don't exactly have, Tom Holland Parker on them. It's just kind of annoying. Where I'm perfectly happy with seeing how Disney is handling Spider-Man as a character, the fact that Sony's still trying to go out of their way to try and rectify and still have using the ownership of these characters for their own personal financial gains is just kind of sickening to me.
It's genuinely insulting Spider-Man. Like, oh my god. Oh man.
Worst movie to probably the best movie. Let's go. Move on.
Oh hell yeah.
Let's move on because
what's up, Danger? No, what's up, Danger?
Yeah, we've definitely saved the best till last here. Let's talk about Into the Spider-Verse, or gush about it, because I know we all absolutely adore it.
Oh my god, okay.
I think I'm right in saying it's absolutely all of our like favourite Spider-Man films.
I really want to give a lot of huge praise to Sony Pictures Animation, who are the primary producers of this movie, because if a lot of you remembered, like back in 2017, the year before this movie debuted, Sony Pictures Animation probably released one of the worst pieces of cinematic travesty to ever come out, which was obviously the Emoji Movie. So basically, to see this company go from rock bottom to not only making an utterly incredible movie that basically basically respects everything about this character's epic legacy, but also becomes praised by tons of industry professionals and even beats Disney at their own game, and actually becoming one of the first non-Disney animated movies to actually win an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. This movie is an accomplishment. It's a genuinely beautiful
We accept
feat.
your apology, Sony.
Yeah.
This is their apology for like Venom and the Emoji movie.
I'm not a fan with what Sony's been doing with the Spider-Man property, but if their animation division is actually able to do a much better job at actually honouring Spider-Man than the actual proprietary people that own it in the first place, then you know something's wrong.
Yeah, the animation style is like brilliant. Every frame looks like it's ripped from a comic book.
It's fantastic, genuinely. Like, it's such like an experimental style. I love it. Like they're actually pushing boundaries instead of just phoning everything in and just making a Spider-Man film.
You also have to remember that Phil Lord and Chris Miller are actually involved on the production, and they had to do similar things in order. They had to do similar things in order to craft the animation for the Lego Movie, because they had to replicate stop motion. But this time they had to replicate the visual style and line and artwork of, you know, a lot of Marvel comic books. So that meant, I believe they said they took well over a year before they actually started production, doing tons of tests just to make sure they could get the animation correct, because not only did they have to deal with trying to design and animate relatively humanoid looking characters correctly, but they also had to use a lot of 2D animation in every single frame in order to get the line work correct. And they also had to animate everything on 2s instead of a standard 24 frames a second, so they could basically get that sort of panel feel of the comic book style right without it looking
it's
too
so nice
uncanny.
how like comic book panels and like boxes like show up like when people do stuff. It just feels like actually comic book. It's like looks so great.
It's a really cool art style.
I mean, like it works so well because this isn't the first movie that's tried to get the feel of a comic book right. Do you remember that 2003 Hulk movie?
Oh god, yeah.
Yeah, oh god,
they tried to replicate like this comic book art style, but because the film was so tonally inept with it, what it wanted to be, it just made the comic book editing style just seem not right. Yeah. But I think it works better here because A, it's animated, it already fits the style so much better out of that. But it really does actually prove how important animation is as a craft, in the sense that it can actually be used to actually tell stories in very visually unique and new ways that most live action movies probably couldn't. And that's what this movie does entirely. Every single frame of the movie feels like a masterpiece. You could basically just capture any frame from the film and probably hang it on your wall and it would look beautiful.
True, yeah. I mean, we haven't even really gotten to the actual story of this film. Gushing about the animation and stuff, but the story is absolutely top class. I think Miles Morales is
not just Peter Parker again. It's so great.
I actually like how the film opens with you being introduced to the Chris Pine Peter Parker. You know, that's okay, let's do this one last time, and it basically just tells you everything you need to know about that character and how he loves being Spider-Man and how everything's sort of worked out for him. And along with that, they do a bunch of parodies from a lot of the Sam Raimi trilogy, including stuff like the kissing scene, the emo Peter Parker dance and everything. And I like that sort of stuff because it actually introduces you to the character and what you believe this character's going to be, until it completely retcons it, the scene afterwards, where you're just introduced to Miles Morales just sort of in his own little world, listening to a little bit of Post Malone and doing some cool graffiti work.
Yeah.
It sets up the character perfectly in a sense because it's a different take, but it's understandable because it's saying, hey, this Peter Parker's got everything figured out. Now it's time for the next generation to step in, basically.
Yeah. Miles Morales is just such a fresh take on Spider-Man because we've seen Peter Parker so many times before, and I love Tom Holland to death, and he's an amazing Peter Parker and Spider-Man. But like having a whole different character to like take the main role is so refreshing, and I love. I
think it's also great that it has a different background because we've always been used to Peter Parker just crushing over girls and going to high school or college or anything. But no, Miles Morales is different. He has a mother and father, one of whom is a cop, meaning that there's a bit more emotional stakes with him being Spider-Man later on. He obviously goes to a private high school and he's obviously stressed out with a lot of the struggles that he has with his personal and educational life. He has a massive love fatherly, almost like relationship with his uncle. And obviously there's the fact that he's of a Puerto Rican descent. So there's obviously a lot of bits of dialogue where he speaks some minor bits of Spanish, I think. So yeah, he feels like a different take, but not in a way that feels like it's shoving in some sort of PC agenda, if you get what I mean. It's never preachy about anything.
New York, like in the movie, like has so much charm in it. Like all the background, like you can see like loads of details. Like it's just like got so much charm. It feels alive, and not like any other like suburban
Oh, absolutely.
city
it
movies. Like it feels like so alive.
the way that the film uses color is kind of unprecedented. The last time I watched it, I actually watched it on a 4K HDR format, and it was actually such a gorgeous feast for the eyes because you could see so much rich details and basically everything that you could see. Like the final act of the movie, where you just see colors spreading around everywhere, and you're seeing all of these different spider people fighting each other. It's so obviously beautiful to look at. But I feel like talking about this, we're kind of deviating from the story a bit more. But basically, what ends up happening is like just like with the standard Peter Parker story, he ends up getting a spider bite. He starts developing the spider abilities of his own, and what happens is that he actually meets his universe's iteration of Peter Parker, and during a fight with the Kingpin, he actually ends up not making it. He actually ends up in a unpredictable turn of events actually dying under the Kingpin's clutches, who's planning to basically use a device to basically open up portals to a bunch of different universes in an attempt to actually bring back his dead wife and kid. And it's through this experience where Miles Morales finds that he has a job to do to try and destroy this collider that Kingpin's building, alongside this new alternate take on Peter Parker, who, unlike this, the universe of Peter Parker, who has had life work out for him, this universe's Peter Parker is kind of down on his luck. He lost Aunt May, he's got divorced from his wife. Life just hasn't worked out for him, and that dynamic works extremely well, if you ask me.
Yeah, and also there's the other Spider-Man characters that actually give it a chance to shine. Ones that you wouldn't necessarily like know about, so stuff like film noir Spider-Man,
Penny Parker. Spider-Ham.
Yeah, Spider-Ham, which is the best character.
And a new modern take on Gwen Stacy as Spider-Gwen as well.
I love Gwen in this. She's amazing. Like she's like the Amazing Spider-Man Gwen, just like turned up to 11. It's so good.
I like all the other takes on the Spider people as well, because with Spider-Noir, Penny Parker, and Spider-Ham, that also allows the animation to go even further with them experimenting with different styles, including noir, obviously American cartoons and Eastern Japanese animation as well. So yeah, it's obviously them showcasing their skills even further than they already could. But I like how with all of these spider people, they're able to help Miles Morales on his journey, because they've all gone through some of the same sort of emotions and pain that he himself have gone through. They had to deal with learning about their new abilities. They've all lost something incredibly personal to their own lives. And it kind of hits home this message of the movie that anybody could be Spider-Man. It doesn't matter about, developing your powers. You getting bitten by that radioactive spider could have happened to anybody. It's about everybody learning from each other, power teamwork, but also learning how, anybody can be Spider-Man, basically.
Yeah, and of course, in this film, we get to see this version of Aunt May, who is completely badass, and I love to bits.
She is incredible, actually. She's actually voiced by Lily Tomlin, aka Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus, so it's almost perfect, because you got a woman playing two badass characters, essentially, both old women.
I can't even really think of too much I dislike. I mean, I guess the villains aren't the best. Like, Doc Ock is kind of just thrown in there and isn't amazing.
The story's not really about her, though. It's not like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 or Spider-Man 3, where they try to integrate some story focus. It isn't necessarily her story. But I like the Kingpin a lot in this movie, actually. I know some people probably would have wanted to see a bit more of him, but for one thing, I actually love his design. I like how through the magical power of animation, they make him like this big, bulky figure, but
He looks incredible.
Yeah, he does. But it's also the fact that his backstory is very good as well. You can understand his own pain, essentially, and why he wants to use the collider to bring his wife and kid back through just basically pulling another one from an alternate dimension. He's not focused on it too much, but at the same time, I probably think that him focusing a bit more on him would have detracted a bit from the core story anyway.
I guess I just want to say to anyone listening, if you haven't given this film a chance, or you think, oh, it's just a cartoon and stuff, and we will be touching on this this subject in the next episode, but if you do think, oh, it's just a cartoon, it's not worth it, give it a shot.
It's brilliant.
It's genuinely fantastic.
I have had family who have not been willing to give this film a chance just because of the bias of the fact that it's animated, and that's sort of the depressing truth for me. A part of me doesn't kind of blame them, because the overall state of animated movies is actually pretty goddamn depressing, especially looking at the upcoming slate of animated movies we have, but that doesn't mean that animation should not be disregarded. It's a powerful way of telling new and inventive stories, and I personally hate to kind of admit it, but if it weren't for the fact that this movie had been animated, I don't think the film would have had quite the same edge that it already had.
Yeah, the animation does kind of give it a lot more character, because there's a lot more you can do with it.
The
and
animation's
with it,
made to look wrong, like it's handmade, not actually perfect. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually don't really have much else to say about it. It's a genuinely gorgeous movie, for one thing. It's got an amazing story with a huge emotional punch. I don't think we can really say much else about it that most people haven't already said before, really, because
Yeah.
it's already been praised to hell and come from tons of critics and audiences and industry professionals. It's obviously
one of the best films of last year, definitely.
It's probably my favourite film of 2018, period, actually. It's easily my favourite Spider-Man movie by a long
Yeah, the
shot,
soundtrack
anyway.
is brilliant.
The soundtrack is fantastic in this.
Oh yeah, it is. I heard that a lot of people were kind of dissatisfied by the film's use of R&B tracks initially because it just seemed like a bit.
But it kind of makes sense because that's the kind of thing that Miles would listen to.
Yeah, exactly. And besides, it gives the film its own sort of unique feel because Miles's Puerto Rican heritage is kind of fits well with the sort of hip hop and Puerto Rican music essentially. Plus, it helps.
Plus, he's quite young as well.
Yeah.
So,
Plus, you have to remember that they aren't songs that have been like made before and they were just added into like this sort of jukebox soundtrack. They were all original songs made by artists who have just been asked to create new tracks specifically for a movie, essentially. And you know what? I'll just say this for a bit. It's actually worth buying the soundtrack online or on CD if you can, because it's actually worth a good listen.
Yeah, I like how they made like a Christmas album as well with loads of Christmas songs out.
But yeah, I have nothing else to say. If you haven't seen it, please do. It's worth
definitely.
every single bit of time you
Fantastic.
have. But yeah, that basically wraps everything up as far as we're concerned regarding this retrospective here.
Yeah. So yeah, Spider-Man films have been a real mixed bag, I think. Some have been fantastic, others have not been fantastic.
And some have been just sort of straight down the middle or just generally mixed. It's a weird situation to me because the character has evolved. I think the character is finally now in a position where he's going in the right direction because we've obviously had Spider-Verse, which has obviously just opened the floodgates for whatever amazing possibilities could be taken. But obviously the character's still in, of course, very good hands with what Disney are obviously doing with the character as well.
To definitely make a Spider-Verse 2, which I'm excited for.
I'm excited for it, but at the same time, I'm not quite sure what they're going to do with it because I don't want them to just make it because money. I want them to make it because there's
Spider-Verse felt like a very singular story, essentially. It didn't feel like it had much possibility for where else it could take it.
I just want to see what else they do with it because I'm genuinely just not sure at this point.
I'm not even sure if Phil Lord and Chris Miller are even involved on it, really.
Yeah, like normally with sequels, I can sort of tell, okay, maybe they'll do this and this. This one, no idea because it doesn't feel like it should have a second film, but here we are.
But yeah, that's everything, I guess, guys. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us all, yeah?
Yeah. Thanks, Will.
Oh, yes. No problem. I'm happy to be here.
Good, yeah. That'll probably just about do it for this episode of Spoiler Alert. So until next time, I've been Ned.
I'm Kyle.
And I've been Will.
And we'll see you guys in the next one. See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.